inside main, right? So inside main, instead of this paragraph, not that it isn't a perfectly nice paragraph, I'm going to put parentheses because this is going to be multi-line now. And I'm going to put, well, let's just start there and do it wrong first. What if I say sidebar, note list, and NoteForm? Overlooking for the moment the fact that those components don't exist yet, what's the problem? It's not in one single component. You can only return one. No, it can have stuff nested inside it, but you can't return a bunch of siblings. So we're going to have to wrap all those in a div. I will give the div a class name of capital M main, because that will be our convention.
So when you're wrapping them, is there a certain wrapper that you usually use? Is it always div? Or?
It's usually div, but if it makes sense for it to be something else, like an LI or whatever, then that's fine too. I don't always create an extra element if I don't need one. But they have to be in something, and without a better option, div will work fine. All right, so we expect an error now. Or 3. Sidebar's not defined, note list not defined, NoteForm not defined. So let's fix those one by one. We'll just start from the left. Sidebar. So let's create 2 new files. Sidebar.css and sidebar.js, both capitalized. Inside sidebar.js, I will import React from React. I will import that style sheet I just made, sidebar.css. And I will create my new component. And again, I will make this a stateless functional component. It's just one big function. So const capital S sidebar equals arrow function. And before I forget, because otherwise I will, export default sidebar. And since the whole component is one big function, I don't need a separate render function. This is the render function. So I just need to return some JSX. And for now, again, I will just return a single paragraph that says sidebar. Now my error hasn't gone away yet. Still says sidebar is not defined. Why? Got to import it. Import sidebar from /sidebar dot referring to the current directory, wherever you happen to be. Having saved that, I'm down to 2 errors. NoteList is not defined and NoteForm is not defined. But sidebar's there. And since sidebar didn't blow up, I know I imported my CSS correctly too. So next, NoteList. First, I will create capital N note capital L list.css and capital N note capital L list.js. In the JS file, I import React from React. I import NoteList.css. I create my component, and again, we'll use a function. Const NoteList equals arrow function. Before I forget, export default NoteList. And then I will just return some very simple JSX. And we'll do these same steps one more time. First, I'll go ahead and import this into main. I don't want to have to hunt for the tab that's already open. I don't want to have to hunt for it in the sidebar. I hit Command P or Control P, start typing main. There it is. Import NoteList this time from NoteList.js. And I should be down to one error. NoteForm is not defined. Groovy. Let's define it. First, I will create NoteForm, capital N, capital F, .css. Then, capital N, note, capital F, form, .js. And this time, I'm going to make it a full-blown component, a class that inherits from React component. So if I import React from React, and then say class NoteForm extends, I could say React dot capital C component. And before I forget, because otherwise I will, export default NoteForm. And don't forget to import our style sheet as well. Import NoteForm.css. Now this is a little different than what they did in app and a little different from what Seth did in Dwarf Underground. React dot component. He just said component, as they did in app. So if we didn't import components separately, this is how we would have to do it. And this totally works. But you could also do this. And get rid of the React dot. So what the heck is that? Why is it in curly braces? When you export something, if you export default, that's what will get imported if you don't include curly braces. But you can also export things and give them names as you export them, in which case you would import them inside curly braces. So component is a named export from React. We'll have named exports of our own much later in this app, not today. But that's the difference. This is the default export. This is a named export. So when you import the default, you don't have curly braces. When you import a named export, use curly braces. Now, since this is a full-blown component, an actual class, we do need a render function, a render method, and that's where our JSX goes. So I can still just return a very, very simple piece of JSX. NoteForm. And hopefully our errors went away and we see those three components.
Why is this one a class?
Ah, shucks. I didn't import it right. I'll answer that in a sec. In main, we still need to import NoteForm from NoteForm. There we go. So to Nick's question, why is this one a class and the others aren't? Sometimes you have to use a class, and I happen to know this is going to need to be a class later, and I will save you the trouble of converting it to one by just making it a class right off the bat. It needs to be a class if it has state, if it has its own internal state. And it also has to be a class if it's going to use what's called a lifecycle method. And we won't get into that today, but basically there's some built-in methods in the component class that will run at certain times in that component's lifecycle, like right before it renders to the DOM or right after it renders to the DOM, stuff like that. And if you need to use any of those, you have to inherit as well. And I know we're going to do that stuff with this one. So all right, we have these three components. Let's commit that, add sidebar, NoteList, and NoteForm components.